So it is such an honor today to have the Honorable Teresa Tomlinson, our very own Mayor of Columbus, here with us as our first speaker. Mayor Tomlinson, I told you earlier, she is a great friend and great supporter of Fort Benning. And many of you know she was elected the 69th mayor, the first female mayor of Columbus on November 30th, 2010, with 68% of the vote. Now, as a fellow mayor, I'd like to point out that her election was far more successful than the margin I enjoyed when I was selected as your mayor. Nobody ran against me. Mayor Tomlinson was reelected for a second term on May 20th of 2014, making her the first mayor since the city's consolidation in 1971 to win re-election in a contested race. No surprise to any of us, but she's been named to Georgia Trend's 100 most influential Georgians, not just once, but 4 times. I'm going to have her speak at our CARE meeting more often. She's a 1983 graduate of Chamblee High School in Atlanta, a 1987 graduate of Sweetbriar College in Virginia, and also a 1991 graduate of Emory University School of Law up in Atlanta. So please join me in welcoming the Honorable Teresa Tomlinson.
Well, thank you, Colonel, so much. Wow, this is really great to be here. What a great crowd. I want to commend you on taking time out to be part of this Women's Leadership Forum. It's so important that we get together to discuss these issues, to really craft our personal style of leadership. I want to, of course, thank Colonel Hiles and the leadership here. They are such great partners with us. It's a real pleasure to have this relationship with Fort Benning, and it's certainly commendable what they do to promote women's leadership, and so it's just a great honor for me to be here. When I was looking at some of the materials and what all you all would be doing today, I thought, you know, maybe the best thing to do is just to provide some random comments and observations. And I knew there was going to be a Q&A, and I would rather really talk about what you would like to know about than for me to drone on. But of course, you can't give me a microphone and ask me to speak about women in leadership without me having at least a few observations. The one thing I would say is that we all attend conferences about leadership. We read books about leadership, magazine articles, handouts, pamphlets, whatever it may be. And you always see the 10 steps of leadership, the 4 surefire ways to become a leader, whatever it may be. That's very, very helpful. But you have to take all of that with a grain of salt, because leadership is uniquely personal. Frankly, it's built on your personality. And we all have our individual strengths, our gifts, and the object of these various conferences, books and magazines and so forth is that we learn from one another, from shared experiences, and then we meld that to our strengths and our personality. And that's where you come up with your individual leadership stamp. As they say, you know, in the book of Esther, a leader for a time such as this. Well, think of all the different times, all the different challenges that the world presents us. And so there's a right leader for every one of those times. And it could well be you. And that's our objective today, frankly, is to help you optimize and become aware of your personal style of leadership and when the time is right for your leadership. I want to talk a little bit about my personal story, not because it's any better or worse, but because I've found when women get together and share their experiences, frankly, that's some of the most valuable information of what makes up your story and what makes up your story and why you're in that particular place and the challenges you had to overcome. I've been able to glean the most helpful information from hearing about your journeys and other women's journeys that have been through, frankly, unique circumstances. Is there anybody in here who's ever held public office? Okay, I can provide some unique insight. But just a couple of things about my personality. I am the type of individual that cannot sleep at night if I should have said something and didn't. That's what keeps me awake. Not that I talked too much. Not that I said something a little outside my lane. Not that maybe I wasn't the most experienced person in the room and I challenged the expert. Sure, you know, it's a little uncomfortable. But I tell you what, I'd rather be in that situation than go to bed at night and think, I knew I should have said something. I knew I should have said something. That just didn't feel right to me, and I didn't share my perspective. And so that is sort of a particular trait that I think on which my entire leadership style is built. I think that, for me, makes me more of a change agent leader. I certainly enjoy and appreciate when I have the opportunity to be a management style leader, which is incredibly important because you can't be changing all the time or you might drive right off a cliff, right? So there's time for change agent leadership and there's time for essential maintenance leadership. But particularly with change agent leadership, you will be in troubled waters. You will be in uncertain times. You will be dealing with a factor of the unknown. And you all have heard, given your particular background, the old adage about courage is not the absence of fear, it's the ability to take action in the face of fear. So don't let any great leader tell you that somehow they are immensely brave or certain of the future. They are not, they simply can't stand stagnant or status quo. They have to take action. And so that's a particular trait that you'll see in change agent leaders. As far as background, my mother, I don't tell this often because she hates this story, but since she's not here, my mother is brilliant. She is the most graceful and wonderful woman you've ever wanted to meet, and she didn't graduate from high school. You would never know that if you met her and talked to her. But she didn't graduate from high school. She worked a blue-collar job for 35 years to make sure that my sister and I could go to college. And something about seeing the physicality of this graceful woman in her blue-collar job inspired me with a particular work ethic. And I think a gratitude for those that had to do things a little bit differently than the luxuries we have with us today. I was blessed to come up with a very strong family that loved me regardless of the things I said when a microphone was put in front of my face, or the controversial positions I took, even as a high school student, by the way. I had the opportunity to lead the first local chapter of Students Against Drunk Drivers when the drinking age was 18, which made me profoundly unpopular that particular semester. But nevertheless, my family loved me. And so to the extent that you have friends, family, a network, some base, that's so important because it allows you to take risk. It allows you to be involved in controversy because you know somewhere there is a person that unconditionally loves you and will provide you safe harbor when all of this is done. I had the opportunity to go to a women's college, which for some is a little unusual. I actually was headed to Georgia Tech to become a chemical engineer and had lived my entire high school life for that objective, and then somehow ended up at a liberal arts women's college in Central Virginia. But it was the best decision of my life, and I will tell you, it's summed up in one simple story. After graduating from Sweetbriar College in Virginia, I went on to Emory University Law School, and it was a very rigorous, intensive academic environment, as you can imagine. And one day, I bounded down to the instructor's well to ask the question of a, inspired 22-year-old. And the professor was this older, really curmudgeonly man, and he said, Miss Pike, I've never met a graduate of a women's college that didn't think she had the most important thing to say. I said, oh, thank you. But that's what going to a women's college did for me. It provided me with that environment that reveled in the intellectual rigor of what thoughtful women had to say. I knew no different. And so those sort of twists of fate, having a mother that was such an incredible figure and source of inspiration related to work ethic, and if you work hard enough, good things will happen, and if you're a good person, good things will happen, and having a safe harbor and a strong family, and having come up in those formative intellectual and leadership building years in a women's college where the judiciary committee was women and the student body president was a woman, and so on, a class president and so on and so forth was a woman. I literally came out at 22 years old and was fearless. And then I became a lawyer. And all that was sucked right out of me. But the truth is, I had the opportunity to work for a fabulous firm. It was a national firm specialized in complex litigation. They didn't do anything like normal law firms. The cases came only from other lawyers, and they handled very, very few cases. Cases you would see nationally and maybe hear about in the news and so forth. And so I was hired by accident. I feel absolutely certain. I was the youngest by almost 15 years. Never before had the firm hired a lawyer out of law school. I think somebody might have thought they needed some research done. I'm not really sure why the offer came, but it was immediately apparent that they had no training program, because all of the lawyers there were what they call laterals. They had been successful in their career otherwise, they had been partners in other firms, and they had transferred to this firm to do this particular boutique type litigation called complex litigation. And what in the world a first year lawyer has to offer, nobody there knew, I assure you. But what happened was they realized that they were taking so few cases, that these cases were epic. They were lasting 5 years, 6 years, that they were denying themselves the opportunity to take fairly valuable cases that may turn around a little bit sooner. So they were having a meeting one day up on the 5th floor of the building and said, you know what we need to do? So we need to start taking some of these cases that are referred to this firm that we send out, and we read 2 weeks later somebody has settled for millions of dollars. And somebody said, yeah, well, don't we have a woman on the 2nd floor somewhere? So he said, yeah, go get her. And that's how I became, it was my job to take really interesting cases with big upside that were in a ditch. Because they felt that if they sent one of their valuable lawyers on those cases and it never really turned around, then they've wasted a real asset. Somebody who could have been working on one of these $100 million cases. But with me, they had nothing to lose. So they sent me around the country, and I landed on cases that you've probably read about. It was a true adventure. The Value Jet case in the Florida Everglades, a horrible tragedy. I was one of the lead lawyers in that case. The Health South debacle that you may remember reading about, the demise of Arthur Anderson and some of the litigation that resulted from that, and some of the businesses and individuals that were harmed because of that. But it was an incredible journey of always being well over my head. I was never in the courtroom, and one day in particular I recall, where anyone was younger than my father. And people ask me all the time, you know, have you been prejudiced against as a woman, gender bias? I would have answered that question several years ago, probably no, because one of the greatest impediments I felt to success was my age. I am probably one of the only people you've ever met that could not wait to turn 50. I mean, and when people told me on my 50th birthday, they said, oh, you know, don't worry, you're 50. I was like, worried? I've been waiting since I was 35 to be 50. I've been counting the days. There were so many times I was in the courtroom and I would say, if only I was older, this judge would listen to me. You know, the gravitas that comes with experience. It just the war years and the miles that only age can bring you. And so in this particular day was, oh my goodness, I don't know, 32. Now this was, you remember the crash of 2008, the mortgage loan debacle. Our firm was involved nationally in some mortgage loan fraud cases that were the first that sort of brought that to light and have been depicted in some of the movies. It's interesting to see the way they depict it. But in any event, we were there. There were 15 nationwide class actions. 15 of the largest banks in the country had been sued for some of the mortgage fraud practices. And I was there alone with a paralegal. And so I went in, and of course the banks of lawyers on the other side, and went in to the women's bathroom, because I could be alone there, and tried to garner some courage. And I came up with a leadership test that I really still use today, and so I'll share that with you. And I mean, this is when the clouds are dark, because nobody would have bet on us being successful that day. And so when you literally are trying to muster the courage against formidable odds, I ask myself, am I a reasonable person? Have I worked as hard as I possibly could have worked to do a good job and see a good end to this today? Have I listened to opposing views and thoughtfully and respectfully considered them? And are my motives pure? Do I just want the best right thing to be done? Am I looking for a promotion, or do I want to get my name in the paper? What's my objective here? Is my motives pure? And if you can answer those questions in the affirmative, I suggest to you that you have good grounds to stand on justifiable righteousness. You're there to be used as a tool for that day, for a higher purpose. It's not about you. It's not what you've prepared for. You've prepared to be used as a tool for some other objective. Because the truth is, everybody in this room is able. But with that ability comes the responsibility. To use yourself and your particular talents as a tool to achieve some greater purpose. I will tell you, that particular day, I was fortified to go in. The objective that day, without getting you in the weeds, was that there was a lot of dance and shadow boxing around what was really going on. And what was really going on was ugly. And the types of things you don't necessarily say when you're trying to win friends and influence people. And as a young person, to say things that are profoundly controversial, particularly with a young person, but I think anybody would have challenges with that, it's unnerving. And so that particular day I walked in and had nothing to lose, because I did believe that we were standing on justifiable righteousness. And the judge was truly just transfixed. I don't think he had ever quite heard that type of candor before about particular things. But I remember one of the opposing lawyers, they said nothing, they were literally slack-jawed, but one of the opposing lawyers finally shouted out, "But Judge, we don't do things this way." And I knew I had him. Because if that was the best he had, he couldn't respond substantively. But we won that day, and it was a lesson of a lifetime. Lesson of a lifetime. Sometimes you have to say harsh things, or unsettling things, or controversial things. As long as you're respectful to other people and have thoughtfully considered their views, as long as your motives are pure, you're not there to harm others, you're there to receive a better objective, a higher goal, then you have a duty, if you're able, to speak with great candor so people know exactly what you're talking about. So much is lost in the niceties of the world, and that's great, but you have to speak with great candor. I want to just say a few things about women and networking and then come back around, as I said, to your questions. But sometimes with networking, there are people that think it's maybe not time best spent, right? Maybe I didn't get a lot out of that particular networking thing. I didn't come away with any 4 steps of betterment, any 10 roles of leadership I needed to apply. And that may be true, but I want to give you an example. When I moved to Columbus, Georgia in 1994, there were very few women lawyers, particularly in litigation. And so the 4 or 5 of us that would run into each other every now and then met down on Broadway at a little place called Mary's New York Bagels. This was a long time ago. And so we thought, if there's 4 or 5 of us, or maybe a couple more. So we sent away the Georgia Bar and asked them to send us a list of the lawyers in Columbus, Georgia. And there were 104 women lawyers in Columbus, Georgia in 1994. But no network. And so we created the Columbus Association of Women Lawyers, which our male brethren pointed out to us very quickly was call girls. So we regrouped, changed the name, but we began to meet monthly and have lunch. And so after a couple of meetings, I got called in to one of my senior partner's offices, who was like this guy's fabulous, so I don't want you to get the wrong impression. Awesome person, a mentor of mine. And so he called me and he said, I've been chosen to talk with you about this women's group. The bar's called me and they're very, very, very concerned about you all meeting. They feel like it suggests that there's a schism somehow, that we're not serving your needs at the bar, that we're not one, and so what we'd like y'all to do is sort of abandon this group that you have and come into back in, and we'll let y'all meet in another room if you want to, and all this kind of stuff. And so I'm sitting there thinking, what is he talking about? Because the truth was that when we were meeting, we were talking about childcare and houses that were going on the market. Nothing important or threatening at that time. We were just getting together and commiserating. But you know what was important about that? They thought it was important. They thought it was important. And we didn't yet know how important it was. We didn't yet know that just getting together as women lawyers with shared experiences and the various stresses that puts on your life, that just getting together, whether you came with the answer to life as you know it, that came out of that day with the answer of life as you know it, or simply had a few minutes of professional commiseration, it is greatly important to network. Build those relationships, because you never know when you may cross paths professionally. And so what you're doing today, is so incredibly important. Just to close, when I ran for office, I never thought that I would run for public office. I've always been interested in government, and I will tell you, government is extraordinarily important. We do ourselves a disadvantage and disservice, and we have been doing it for decades by demeaning our civic realm. I mean, folks, the United States of America is a government. That's what you're fighting for. Those of you all who are in for, that's what you're fighting for. That's what we're cheering you on for, is the government, because that's where we come together and exercise our wills through our government. And so I've always felt government was so important, but never saw myself running. But I was actually, the then mayor had decided he wasn't going to run, and so I was actually trying to find somebody really good. Somebody who knew about government, somebody that was comfortable talking in front of people, somebody that knew a little bit about what was going on in Columbus. Made a few phone calls, people were like, well, I'm really not interested, but and plus I really don't know what was going on. Well, we can teach you about the current events, and we can get you a briefing book on that. Well, I'm not really comfortable about this and don't understand how, well, we can get you a book on that. And I remember thinking, God, there's got to be somebody who understands government, who knows a little bit about what's going on with Columbus, Georgia, doesn't mind speaking in front of crowds. And I thought, well, maybe I should cut out the middleman here and run, but I wasn't sure, never really thought about it. So I called the big political guru in town and asked him to have coffee with me. at the Burger King on Winton Road, which is an old kind of political haunt, by the way. If you're ever in there and see some folks huddled in the corner, you just really don't know what's going on. But in any event, and so we were meeting, and I asked him what he thought, and he said, "Well, if I were you, I wouldn't do that." He said, "Men don't like you." And I was like, "Oh." And he said, "Yeah, I just think it's a non-starter." And I was like, "Well, I appreciate that." So I went on back to work and did my thing. Later that night, I'm slicing and dicing in the kitchen with my husband. We're getting dinner, and he said, "Oh, how'd that meeting go about whether, you should run for mayor?" I said, "Oh, pfft." He said, "We need to move on to something else." He said, "That is a non-starter." He said, "Why?" I said, "Because," he said, "men don't like me." Silence. Turned around and he was like, "Well, I like you." I was like, "Yeah, my husband does like me. And my partners like me just fine. I know a lot of men that have liked me." Ended up running, by the way, 4 candidates, 3 men. I was the only woman. We had 44 debates. I quickly learned a couple of secrets about public office. It's a meritocracy. People want the very best person in that role so that they don't have to think about it. Don't surprise them in the morning paper with something they have to get concerned about. They want to go to their job and raise their kids and enjoy their hobby without having to figure out what's going on with the government. And they just want somebody that they can have confidence will run it. And so that became obvious. As the Colonel said, we did win that campaign with 68% of the vote. I want to say we carried 60% of the men. I just want to say that. Men want people of merit in office too. That's just hokum. That's just ridiculousness. I don't even know where those old thoughts come into play. But I do want to share with you a story that I talk about often, but it's so important. I didn't run on the historic value of being the first woman mayor of Columbus. I don't think I ever mentioned it, and I don't remember anybody asking me about it. I was so busy trying to prove why I was qualified and smart enough and all that, tough enough and all of that I never stopped to think about the historic significance. And that night we had this wonderful campaign office on Macon Road, and when WTVM announced that called the election that we were going to win, people just started showing. There were already a couple hundred people there, but people just started showing up. And there were particularly 3 women. I'd never met them before, but they were in their 70s. They didn't come together. And one came and walked up to me, and she was emotional. And she said, "I just want to let you know that I made coffee for 25 years so that you would have the opportunity to run for mayor." And the next woman came up, and the other woman said a story virtually identical to this. "I trained men lesser able than myself to do a job for more pay for 30 years so I'd have the opportunity to vote for you for mayor." And I realized then that I had done a great disservice to the women that had come before me, because there are people out there that have been plowing this field to allow you the luxury to excel. And that's why you have to pick up the mantle and keep pushing on. It's amazing what women before us have done and gone through just to provide us this equal playing field. And that's why you're here today. That's why you're sharing your experiences. That's why you're building these relationships, is so that you can pass it on and you can optimize yourself to take advantage of their hard work in plowing that field. A couple of again, closing remarks. As I said earlier, if you would have asked me before I held public office, I would have said I had never been the object of gender bias. I don't know if that's true, because again, I was ascribing so much of that to my age, right? I was so inexperienced compared to my peers in that particular field. I was so much younger. For some reason, that's what really caught my attention, and a lot of my worry and consternation. There was nothing I could really ascribe to gender necessarily. When I got into public office, however, it is amazing the things people will say and do. And I don't know that they know how revealing it is. And so when I had the opportunity to run for re-election, my worthy opponent called a press conference to announce his situation. And you know, I expected it would be the mayor's taking us on the wrong track. We need to be on the right track. The mayor wants to do this policy. We need that policy. I mean, it called a press conference and said the mayor talks too much. She's unlikable. She cares more about how she looks than what she does. She only wants to cut ribbons. She's not a mayor of substance. The newspaper called me and said, just wondered if you'd like to respond. Your opponent's just announced, and here's some of the things he said about his campaign, and we want to see if you want to respond. I said, no, I think I'm fine. I don't think I got nothing to say about that. You just go ahead and print all that. Because folks, it is a meritocracy. That's what people care about. Who can do the job? So you remember that, you concentrate on that. Sure, there's going to be static, there's going to be people throwing small-minded things and narrow-minded things at you. But the fact of the matter is, it says more about them than it says about you. And it's really revealing a hand that they aren't and can never be a leader. And so you need to keep your eye on your lane of showing why you are an incredibly valuable member of the team and why you're the one that needs the ball to carry across the line. So with that, I'll hush up and take your questions. Yes?
Have you ever considered running for president?
I want to say I actually worked on Capitol Hill and worked for some senators and congressmen campaign, and so been very involved. I know what that takes. It's beyond what you can even imagine. And so I've not contemplated that. Now, I don't say never to whatever comes down the pike. I don't think you ever know where your life is going to take you. But I always joke about in Georgia, you know, because people say, oh, you should run for governor, you should run for this and that. People love to say that if you're in office. And I would say, do you know how much barbecue you have to eat? But the fact of the matter is, to run for something at that level, it is an all-consuming life function. It sucks your whole family in. And so your dad's having surgery, you're not there. You'll get there the next day. And those are just the decisions you have to make when you start running at that high of a level. And so if opportunities present themselves, I'll thoughtfully consider it. But I'm very well aware I will not go in blindly. And I'm very well aware, and I love my family. I've given my service. I continue to serve. I'll be interested myself in what that decision would be. What else? Yes?
Have you had any particular mentors that have assisted you in your career, and what impact have they had on it?
Well, you know, like all of you all, so many mentors. I've already spoken, of course, about my mother. But I'll say the interesting thing, and then, of course, professors in college and such strong, incredible women. But because I was the only woman at my law firm, my early professional mentors were men. And I want to say that because they were formative in my life. And the fact that they wanted to see me succeed, that we had a shared mission and objective was invaluable to me. And the fact that they believed in me, that I could do it. And so I would say that would be the one. I've had a lot of women mentors, as I've referenced, but I would say probably the most surprising thing is I've had some of the most formative mentors have been men, and older men. And I remember one in particular, just life lesson that out of context probably won't be as profound as it was that day in the chaos of all that was going on. But we were involved in a case that was quite controversial, and it was in the Wall Street Journal almost every day, and it was really a big deal. And I was having trouble finding an answer to the particular challenge that was before us. And so I was in his office and I said, I just can't find this. And he said, the law is a tool of justice. You are not there to determine what has happened before is all that there is. You're there to use this as a tool to apply it to the circumstances of today. And I thought, wow, there was a real creative ingenuity about that. And I will say one little lesson that's sort of appended to that I talk about a lot but didn't mention here today is that there is something to be said for inexperience and lack of expertise. Again, you need to be thoughtful and respectful because just because you are ignorant does not mean you're going to be successful. In fact, the deck is stacked against you if you're ignorant or unaware. But inexperience and lack of expertise necessarily breeds ingenuity. And so as a young lawyer that was swimming in the deep end all the time, with that kind of a pep talk, I just kept saying the law is a tool for justice. The law is, how can I use it? There was a lot of ingenuity that did bode well professionally for me in the end with that kind of philosophy. And so I tell young people all the time, when you go in and sit at a table, just because you're the youngest by 20 years, does not mean that you don't have something incredibly valuable to offer. Not knowing how things have always been done is a very valuable asset to have. So, yes, sir.
Mayor Tomlinson, as an elected official, do you believe it is important to continue your career as an elected official, or do you believe at some point you should return back to the private sector?
Yeah, I have no plans. I'm sorry, go ahead.
This is also a two-part question.
Oh, sure, okay.
This will be followed by another question.
I have no plans to be in a particular public office after this. As I said before, if something were to arise and I felt that my leadership style was right for that position or that time, I would I'm sure throw my hat in the ring, but I don't have any particular office in mind. And so I think you can serve in many different ways. I don't think you have to be a lifelong public servant in the realm of elected office in order to serve. But whatever it is, I want to do something. I want to make a difference. That's what I don't have children. And my husband and I were not able to have children. And so I feel that my legacy is dependent on my path of service. Whatever legacy I leave behind will be really only that. So, yes.
In your experience, does this differ, public service, does it differ in between genders?
Well, I mean, you can broadly generalize about a lot of different things related to that. I mean, there are some times where women are seen, to generalize, very stability, right? That they'll bring, when there's a lot of chaos, sometimes people want to elect a woman to a particular position because they think we need some stability. There are a lot of, actually, there are a lot of things about, people will run against women as they did, as I was saying, about being not likable and not being trustworthy and things. Those are very, very common type attacks against women when they're running. However, women that hold office are usually polled very highly for their trustworthiness and their steadfastness and things of that nature. So I guess I would say that it's like anything else in life. We all bring a particular perspective, and we bring a particular, though perhaps highly generalized, set of skills, and we need all kinds to provide true representative elected leadership. So, anything else? Yes?
Who would you say, she was asking about mentors, who would you, for young girls, who would you say is a leader or somebody that you would advise young girls to look towards? Not necessarily women, but just leadership in general.
Well, I gotta say, I probably have to think about that a bit. But there's so many people that do things that are just utterly exceptional. And I hate to pick out, particularly with elected officials, because if you get any higher than local government, you start getting into parties, and then people think I'm suggesting value judgments related to that. But I will tell you, the people that make the really tough and unpopular decisions, to me, deserve our immense respect. Now, the thing with young people is that it's really boring at a higher level. It's very boring to get them involved with, Congress and Senate and that kind of thing, because they can't really appreciate how all that affects them. But I regularly talk with second graders, and that's when they first learn about government. And so to boil it down to that level, let me just make this observation, is it's important that our kids admire the President of the United States, whoever that might be. And it is important that the kids admire the governor and the mayor, not because of the people who hold it, but because of the office that it represents. And I think people do a disservice by, chatting about whatever grievances they have with the government or the particular party and ascribe that to the office in front of their children, because you can almost see the kids in the room whose parents have told them the president or the governor or the mayor is not a good person. And then the others that are so excited to be there. I just can't wait to meet you because you're the mayor. And then ask you, do you live in the White House? But anyway, so that's not a particular, but yeah, I think it's important that we have respect for our elected officials and commend that to our children. Yes.
I guess what I'm wanting to know is, who do you base your leadership characteristics on? I mean, in other words, who do you look at, like, if I could be more like that type of leader?
Yeah.
Gosh,
I'm sorry to be so difficult. That's such a difficult question for me, because I actually find leadership characteristics in people every day, and I'm not so much looking at somebody who is holds a particular office, but when people do something extraordinary, I am moved by that. When they do something against their party because it's the right thing to do, when they do something against their particular constituency because it's the right thing to do for prosperity, that wins my immense admiration. And to give you specific examples of that, I'm afraid would make us really, really partisan in the conversation. That's why the only reason I'm hesitant.
Well, you mentioned
Yes.
Esther, and so I was just...
The what now?
You mentioned Esther,
Oh, yes.
and
Oh,
that's-
absolutely.
that's- I'm just, if you were more politically, or if there were other, Mother Teresa, just
Yeah.
in general. Not
Well,
necessarily-
I mean, most certainly, but I find, and yes, you could go on Mother Teresa and all that, but I gotta tell you, sort of the average man, and I mean that gender neutral exhibition of human exceptionalism in the moment is something that grabs me every single time. A person that just stands up and does. I remember one time, there was an old film, one of those rattly films with the lines going through it, of a gentleman who represented a particular, it was almost an exclusively Catholic borough in New York, and he had to get up. They thought something was going to pass, something was going to move the community forward, but the Catholic community was immensely against it, just across the board. He, as an elected official, knew that this is something the community needed. And there's a film of this particular gentleman getting up to cast the vote, and he was going to be the vote that determined whether or not it passed. If he voted no, it would go to the Senate Pro Tem, and he was going to vote no. And so it would die. If he voted yes, the measure passed. And he got up, and there's this grown man, and there's a tear coming down his face because he knows that's it. He's out of office. But he did it for the state of New York, and he never served another day. And that kind of thing, whether you agree with what he was voting on or not, shows to me somebody an exceptional leadership. So those are the kinds of things I look for, those moments when people do things outside themselves, those extraordinary things. All right. Okay, one more, and then I guess we'll call it a day. Yep.
Okay, I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One is from myself and the other is from my counterpart, Mr. Woodson, the cameraman. I'll ask my question first.
Sure.
Okay. My question is, as you said, obviously you were the first female mayor of Columbus, and you said that you had male counterparts that you looked up to. Why do you think it's important for young women to have females in high leadership roles to look up to?
Sure.
You know, often young girls are told, you know, not to run for office or do things that are maybe considered a man's job. Why do you think it's important for young women to see other women in leadership roles?
Because once they see it, they believe it, and you will never convince them otherwise. You know, once they've met the mayor or seen the mayor on TV or that woman senator or whatever it might be, they know it's possible. And we've seen that, I think, with our first African American president. How many young people come to see me or I go to see them and they talk about the fact that they're going to be president of the United States. And I don't know what that number was before, but I bet it was less. And so absolutely that same impact related to a woman mayor. You can literally see them responding to just the presence and the fact that there's a woman mayor.
And then also, what do you feel, if anything, that you owe to the women who helped pave the way for you? I know you mentioned the 3 women that you met shortly after winning the election. What do you feel that you owe to women like that?
Yeah, a couple things. In this role, good government. And that's a really hard thing to achieve. That's what they elected me for. That's what will leave the best and most reputable legacy. And so the fact that the particular constituency may have thought I would do something different, if that's not good government and that won't bode well for the city of Columbus and all the citizens of Columbus, then I'll have to take a different path. But in the end, you know, running for office naively perhaps was actually easy for me because I made absolutely no political promises. My shtick was, if you will, that you were going to get good government all day long. And I never promised what exactly that might be because I didn't know what that might be, given the circumstances and the judgments that would have to be made. So I think that to the women that plowed the field to be the very best, most reputable I can possibly be, and leave that legacy. And then, you know, I think it also goes beyond just the office. I think it's about events like this and talking to the children and making sure I'm plowing that field too. Because things can revert. We can go back.